Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hi everyone, welcome to the lecture number 18, the fifth lecture on labor market equilibrium. In our last lecture, we discussed about the impact of payroll taxes versus the mandated benefits on labor market equilibrium in terms of wage and employment. We discussed about the impact on both from the workers as well as from the employer side. In this lecture, we are going to discuss about the cobweb model, which describes a dynamic process where shifts in the labor supply and demand leads to fluctuation in the wages and employment levels over time. So, before going into detail to the cobweb model and its application in the labor market, let me discuss about what exactly the cobweb model is. The cobweb model is an economic framework that explains how supply and demand imbalances in markets, and these imbalances in supply and demand can lead to cyclical fluctuations in the price and quantities over time. So, in this model, the producers base their future supply decisions on past prices, which lead to a lagged adjustment process. For example, if prices are high in one period, producers may increase their supply in the next period, leading to an oversupply and consequently the price decreases. Conversely, if the price are low, producers may reduce their supply, leading to an undersupply and consequently the price increases. So, these cyclical fluctuations resembles the shape of a cobweb, and hence the model has been named as the cobweb model. This cobweb model is an economic concept often applied to agricultural markets, but it can also be adapted to labor markets. In the context of this labor market, the cobweb model describes a dynamic process where shifts in the labor supply and demand lead to fluctuation in the wage and employment level over time. So, how this cobweb model typically works in the labor market? Initially, the market, let us say labor market is at equilibrium, and at the outset the labor market assumed to be in equilibrium where the quantity of labor supplied equals to the quantity of labor demanded, and the wage rate is at the equilibrium level. So, in this state there is no surplus or no shortage of the labor, and both workers and employers are satisfied with the prevailing wage rate. Now, suppose because of certain external factors like changes in the technology, consumers preference, government policies or economic conditions can disrupt this equilibrium in the labor market. For example, if there is a sudden increase in the demand for a particular industry product, firm in that industry may need to hire more workers, leading to an increase in the labor demand. Opposite can happen if there is a recession or technological innovation that reduces the demand for certain types of labor demand for the workers, and there may be a decline in the demand for workers. So, in response to this shift in the demand or supply, there is typically a time lag before adjustment occurs in the labor market. So, this delay can be due to factors such as information lag, hiring and training time or contractual arrangements. So, these are the factors which can delay this adjustment or bring some lag, time lag in the adjustment of this demand and supply in the labor market. So, during this adjustment period, wage and employment levels may deviate from their equilibrium values, leading to an imbalances in the labor market. So, as wage and employment deviate from their initial equilibrium, they influence the future labor supply and demand decisions. So, for example, if wages increase due to high demand for labor, more workers may enter in the labor market, or existing workers may increase their hours of work, leading to a high labor supply. Exactly opposite can happen if the wages decreases due to low demand. Some workers may exit the labor market or reduce their hours of work, leading to a lower labor supply. So, this adjustment process described in the labor market through this cobweb model can lead to a cyclical fluctuation in the wage and employment level over the period of time. So, these fluctuations may exhibit a periodic pattern which resembles a kind of the shape of cobweb, which we will discuss in our lecture. This cobweb model highlights the dynamic and often non-linear in nature, and where the supply and demand imbalances can lead to self reinforcing cycles of wage and employment changes. While the model provides insight into the short term dynamics of labor market, it simplifies many real world complexities and may not fully capture the long term equilibrium outcomes in the labor market. Our analysis of labor market equilibrium assumes that markets adjust instantaneously to shift in either supply or demand curves, so that wages and employment changes swiftly from the old equilibrium level to the new equilibrium level. Many labor markets, however, do not adjust so quickly to shift the underlying supply and demand curves. There are some evidence, in fact, that markets for highly skilled workers such as engineers and other specialized professionals have shown systematic periods of booms and busts that dispute the notion that labor market attains competitive equilibrium quickly and cheaply without any cost. Let us consider, for example, the market for new engineering graduates. It has been recognized that the market for newly minted engineers fluctuates regularly between periods of excess demand for the labor and periods of excess supply. As a result, there is a typical cyclical trend in the entry ways of the engineering graduates over time. So, there are some empirical studies. In a series of studies in 1975-76, Richard Freeman proposed a model that showed how these trends in the entry ways could be generated. To explain these models, he assumed two assumptions. First, it takes time to produce a new engineer. Second, the persons decide whether or not to become engineers by looking at the condition in the engineering labor market at the time they enter school. So, whether to become an engineer or not, they take a decision when they enter to their school. So, considering these two assumptions, let us try to explain that how labor market adjustments takes time over the period of time, and how it affects employment and wage outcomes in the labor market. So, here we have considered a simple demand supply framework of this labor market. On this x axis we have taken number of employment, and the y axis we have taken wage. Considering a demand function which is downward sloping d and a supply function which is upward sloping s, the initial equilibrium in the economy is achieved at point A where E0 amount of workers were employed at W0 wage rate. We are talking about the particular labor market which is for the engineers. So, this demand and supply curves shows the demand and supply for the engineers. Now, due to some external factors, let us say some government policies or some external forces which shifted the demand function, means it has increased the demand for engineers due to some reason. Now, the demand function has shifted from D to D dash, and at this demand function, new demand function, there should be E star amount of workers should be employed at W star wage rate. So, this should have been happen, and the economy should have moved from point A to point B. The labor market should have moved from point A to point B. This should have been happened, but the firms will find it extremely difficult to hire this desired number of new engineers, E star amount of engineers, because new engineers do not come out of this thin air simply because the firms want to hire them. It takes time to train new engineers, because the engineering schools are only producing E0 engineers annually. So, the short run supply curve is perfectly inelastic at E0 workers. So, the combination of this inelastic supply curve, which is going to be vertical and going through this E0 workers, and the demand shift increases the entry wage of the engineers to W1. So, what happens when there is a shift in the demand function? Now, the demand function has shifted from D to D1, and this should have been happened that the equilibrium point should have moved from point A to point B. But at this point of time in the engineering labor market, there is only E0 amount of workers are available, and to reach to this point E star, it takes some time. So, the supply function becomes vertical, perfectly inelastic, and it intersects this new demand function at this point, resulting W1 is the wage rate. So, at this particular point of time, because of the increase in the demand for engineering workers, and there is a shortage of workers, and or we can say that only E0 amount of engineers can be produced and can be employed at this point of time, which leads to the wage rate to be W1. Now, while all this is happening in the engineering labor market, a new generation of high school and college students is deciding whether to enter the engineering profession or not. So, when they look at the wage rate, they see the students in this high school and college, they see that there is a relatively high wage in the engineering market, and therefore, they have a large incentive to become engineers. In fact, at this current wage rate W1, a total E1 amount of persons or the students will want to enroll in engineering school. Now, at this going wage rate W1, E1 amount of individuals, number of individuals want to enroll in engineering stream. So, when they enter into the labor market, they find that now at this point E1, again this short run supply function of these engineers become perfectly inelastic. So, when this E1 amount of workers enter into the labor market, the supply short run supply function again become inelastic and intersects the new demand function. We are assuming that there is no change in the conditions on the demand side. So, it intersects the new demand function at this point, deciding the wage rate W2. So, the point here is that now there is an oversupply of these engineers, which leads to a reduction in the wage rate. E1 amount of individuals they enter into this profession looking at the wage rate W1, but when they enter into the labor market, they find that their number is oversupplied and the wage rate has declined W2. The actual wage rate they are going to get is the W2. Now, after a few years, therefore, the E1 new engineers enter the marketplace, and at the time in which this cohort of engineers enter the market, the short run supply function of the engineers again become perfectly inelastic at E1 workers, as I said, and the current market situation is summarized by the inelastic supply curve and the demand curve D. We assume that there is no change in the demand function, which leads to an equilibrium wage rate W2. So, this W2 wage rate is substantially below the wage rate that the new engineers thought that they were going to get. So, in effect the high school and the college graduates presume that they would get the wage rate W1. Therefore, now there is an oversupply of the engineers. Now, considering this W2 wage rate, now some of these students they may not enter into the labor market, and they find that this W2 wage rate is quite low. So, in the next phase which may lead to employing E2 amount of workers, and which may lead to under supply of engineers, considering this W2 wage rate when they compare with W1, now they find that it is quite low. So, some of them they may not enter into this education stream, and at the second time phase we find that only there are E2 amount of workers were employed at this W2 wage rate, again which may lead to the short run supply function perfectly inelastic at E2 wage rate. At this wage rate again we can see that there is some under supply of these engineers, which may lead to the wage rate to be W3. This story does not end here. Still another generation of this high school and college students that they are trying to decide whether to become engineers at the current wage rate W2. So, the engineering profession does not look very attractive. Therefore, few persons will decide to attend engineering schools, and the supply curve again at W2 becomes perfectly inelastic and it is undersupplied. So, this high wage rate induce the next generation of students to oversupply the marketplace, and so on and so forth. If we look at it at a comprehensive way, we can see that at E0 amount of employment and W0 amount of wage rate, if there is any sudden changes happens to the demand function, then there is an increase in the wage rate to W1. Now, considering this W1 wage rate, there will be oversupply of workers to the this particular market, which may lead to increase the number from E0 to E1. Now, with considering E1 amount of workers in the labor market, we can see that the wage rate now at E1 amount of workers they are oversupplied. Now, it may lead to W2 wage rate, and at W2 wage rate only E2 amount of workers were employed, and considering E2 amounts of workers at this point of time, again this short run supply function becomes inelastic and the wage rate becomes W3, because E2 amount of workers at this point of time they are undersupplied, which may lead to another that more individuals should enter into this labor market. So, this is goes on until we reach to this final point, and it just looks like a cobweb. So, this adjustment in demand and supply over a period of time takes some time to get settled to the equilibrium point from point A to point B. When we look at this underlying assumptions of this cobweb model, the cobweb model makes two assumptions. The first is quite reasonable, that it does take time to produce new engineers. So, the supply of engineers can be thought of as being perfectly inelastic in short run. However, the second assumption is more questionable, where we are saying that the workers are very biased when they are considering whether to become engineers or not. Students choose an engineering career based entirely on the ways they currently observe in the engineering market and do not attempt to look into the future when comparing their various alternatives. So, potential engineers have very strong incentive to be well informed about the trend in the wage rate of the newly minted engineers. So, if they knew these trends, they could easily deduce what would happen to them when this cohort enters in the market. In fact, even if many of these students did not bother collecting all these relevant informations, someone would. So, the information could then be sold to the students who would be willing to pay for the valuable informations regarding their future wage prospects. Further, the cobwebs are generated in effect because the students are misinformed. They do not fully take into account the history of wage in the engineering labor market when they are choosing a career. So, students who do take into account the entire history of wages are said to have a rational expectations. If the students had rational expectations, they would be much more hesitant to enter the engineering labor market when the current wages are high, and much more willing to enter into the market when the current wages are low. So, as a result, this cobweb might unravel. However, the evidences provides a strong support of these cobwebs in many professional markets. So, it seems as if the students systematically misforecast the future earnings opportunities, and students are not alone in misforecasting this future. There are some evidences that even professionals tends to have difficulty in predicting this future earnings opportunities. So, the inherent uncertainty in forecasting the future might force the students to place too heavily on the wages they find it now. So, this generates cobwebs in the professional labor markets. So, if you would like to summarize the things which we have discussed so far in this labor market equilibrium in a competitive environment, we can say that a competitive economy is where a homogeneous group of workers and the firms can freely enter and exit the market, and they have a single equilibrium wage across all the labor markets. And there is no unemployment in a competitive labor market, because all the workers, those who wish to work, find a job at the going wage rate, and all the firm, those who want to hire a worker, they can get a worker. So, a competitive equilibrium leads to an efficient allocation of resources. No other allocation of workers to the firms generates higher gains from trade. So, the worker surplus and the farm surplus is maximum. So, the gain from the trade is maximum, and there is an efficient allocation of the resources. However, we have seen that a fraction of this payroll taxes, when it is imposed either on the farm or on the workers, it is passed on to the workers, and also a fraction of that it has been passed on to the farm. This tax burden depends on the elasticity of labor demand. Now, who is going to bear how much, that is decided by the labor elasticity. The more inelastic labor supply function, the higher the fraction of payroll tax that is going to be shifted to the workers. We have also seen that the payroll taxes creates deadweight loss in the economy, and the payroll tax has the same impact on wage and employment regardless of whether it is imposed on workers or it is on the farms. We have seen that the markets for these professional workers are sometimes characterized as by systematic booms and boosts through this cobweb model. So, this is all about the labor market in a competitive environment. In our next lecture, we will discuss about the labor market equilibrium in non-competitive environment, particularly in monopsony and monopoly labor market. Thank you.